Meanwhile, though, 1/4 of Australians in a survey believe someone they know has been the victim of child abuse or neglect, but 48% of us have no idea where to report abuse, and perhaps not surprisingly, 92% believe the public don't do enough to intervene. These are the figures being released during Child Protection Week. And joining me live now is Dr. Neil Carrington, the CEO of Act for Kids. Neil, thanks very much for your time today. Just to start with, what are we talking about when it's abuse or neglect? Does this cover the full gamut?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. When we're talking about abuse and neglect, we're talking about sexual abuse, we're talking about physical abuse, we're talking about emotional abuse and neglect as well. Sexual abuse is a very serious issue. It's 12% of the problem. Many of the children that we deal with are suffering emotional abuse and neglect as well. What
are the signs that you say you should look for? I suppose on two counts. First of all, that children might be in trouble, being abused, but second of all, that adults might be up to something.
Absolutely. I think it's important, first of all, I'd say to your listeners, it's about education and educating yourself and educating your children. We found that statistic that, you know, almost half of people didn't know what to do about the issue, quite worrying. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to educate ourselves about the issue of abuse and neglect, and particularly about signs and particularly about what to do about that. One of the other worrying statistics for us, all of your viewers would be aware of the issue of stranger danger, and they should be. What really worries us is that we know that over 90% of the harm that comes to children in the form of abuse and neglect will come from somebody in a position of love and trust with that child. And we just think that's outrageous.
It is. On the other side of it, these can be difficult conversations, presumably, to have. You might suspect a child's in trouble,
Absolutely.
Is being abused. That might be a family friend. It might be a friend, even a distant, you know, or an immediate family member. How do people have that conversation without causing lifelong offence, or do you need to simply risk that?
Well, it is a difficult one, Tom, and it's something that does need to be handled sensitively. Ideally, you know, I would encourage people to first of all talk with the people involved and to reach out, see if they're okay. We also understand that's not always possible. I think what you have to do is err on the side of the safety of that child. And you've got a responsibility as a citizen to report that to your local authorities and your local agencies. Remember, you know, child abuse is a very serious issue. Not reporting child abuse and neglect is child abuse. So we've got to give that voice to those children, and we've got to speak up for them. It's a myth that kids make up things. I was a counsellor in this field for a number of years, and you know, people often use, oh, well, surely kids are making up things. That's very, very rare. Our kids have got great antenna. We need to listen to our kids, and we've got to make sure that we look for those signs as well. I mean, it could be, for example, in the incidents of physical abuse, that sometimes kids are wearing inappropriate clothing. Sometimes it could be that a child that's been normally outgoing has suddenly become, you know, withdrawn. Now, obviously, you've got to look at these things in the broader context, and we can't overread situations. I understand that. I think it's just so important, though, that you talked about there having the courage. You have to have the courage to speak up. This is the safety of a young child that could be at risk.
In many cases, obviously, people abused have simply found that too difficult to deal with. What about a situation where someone grows up, they become almost aware again in their own mind of the abuse, and they're thinking about speaking up? It can be very difficult to go through that again. What's your experience of how people deal with that and what the best way to handle it is?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we're here talking about it today is a great thing, because in the past people have been reluctant to speak up. Our national ambassador, Sasha Chandler, who was a victim of abuse for a number of years, he's had the courage to speak up and identify that offender, take it through the court system, and he continues the fight with us at Act for Kids today to giving that voice. It's not an easy task. People who have been abused and neglected, they carry the scars with them for a very long time. At Act for Kids, we work in the education space. We also work in the therapy space. Sadly, all of our centres have got wait lists, so there's a lot of work to do in this space. We know, for example, that there were over 350,000 notifications of abuse and neglect last year, and of those, over 50,000 of those were confirmed. Now that's an alarming figure, and I think it's actually an underrepresented figure. We know, for example, that Indigenous kids are 7 times more likely to suffer abuse and neglect. So as a society, we've got to become educated about this issue, and we've got to learn what to do about it, and we've got to, when people do disclose, it's not easy, and we've got to support them through that process. We know, for example, that less than a third of adults will actually do anything when a child does disclose to them that they are suffering abuse and neglect. And if we don't do anything, then that child's being let down yet again. So that's our passion at Act for Kids, is to try and support those kids.
Dr. Neil Carrington from Act for the Kids, thanks for your time today.
Really appreciate it, and if any of your viewers want to see what we do, jump online and have a look at the work that we do right around Australia. Everything that we do is free of charge.
Absolutely. Dr. Neil Carrington there from Brisbane.